Aloha. Let's see if I can get this a little bit more. All right. After this weekend, I should have a new phone, and then I'll start doing these videos on the phone, not live as I've been doing them. Anyway, this is part 3 of this discussion of the different versions of A Course in Miracles. Which one is the best? There's no answer to that question. As I've been saying, the debate will be endless. As the Course says, those who seek controversy will find it, but those who seek clarification will also find it. And the clarification, very simply, and you don't have to watch the rest of this video, is that everybody's right. You know, all the different versions have their purpose, have their power, have their place. And whichever version you feel guided to, whichever version that you like, is the version for you. And that's the end of the story, really. We don't even have to talk about this. I'm going to talk about it anyway, just to create some interesting content, I hope. But because it is an interesting, it is an interesting topic, and I don't think we should stop looking into it. People like me, you know, will continue to look into these things and continue to consider what people have to say. But ultimately, these things just end up dividing people and end up creating us and them type of situations, which we are finding in the Course in Miracles community. And there are people that say, well, we have the right answer, you don't have the right answer. We are staying truer to the Course, staying truer to Jesus. You are not. And that's all BS, really. And not to say that some answers maybe are not closer to the truth than others, but if you are dividing, if you are creating separation, it generally, and if you're attached to that separation, like you might make these arguments and say and not be attached in any way, and be very at peace. But if you're upset at all, it probably means that you are you have not practiced, done the forgiveness work to the fullest extent that you could. All right, so let's with that said, I brought ChatGPT last time, and now we're going to go to Google Gemini. People say that Google Gemini is maybe more biased. That's what I've read. And AI in general, there are arguments, there's debate about this as well, controversy about AI. Many people these days are poo-pooing AI and saying AI is, not a very reliable source. It's biased. It's this and that. It hallucinates. It makes up stuff. All these things not good for the environment. People rely on it too much, and they're not using their brains. Personally, I think AI has its place. I wouldn't overly rely on it, but I think it does bring together quite a lot of information very quickly, and I think that's very useful. So as long as it's still here, as long as it still exists, I don't think it would be wise to not use it as a tool. So that's what we're doing. All right. So here's what Google Gemini has to say. I asked it, what are the best arguments against what is said in the ACIM.org article regarding the editing of ACIM. So they have a FAQ on their website where they talk about the different versions of A Course in Miracles and say why they believe that the original FIP version is the best, or is truest to what Jesus actually wanted. Um, but they also say that all the versions can be helpful and can be useful, and they don't want to say that one version that someone should not use one of the other versions that are out there. So just real quickly, I'm just going to read arguments against the provided articles, description of A Course in Miracles, editing, primarily focus on the extent of the revisions, the nature of the removed material, and challenges to the authority or accuracy of the editing process as described by the Foundation for Inner Peace and Foundation for A Course in Miracles. Key arguments against the narrative presented in the article include extent and nature of the edits. There are more edits than they said there were, right? They lied or they misrepresented what actually happened. They said that there were relatively few edits, but there were many edits. There were 70,000 words that were taken out, et cetera, et cetera. Removal of material beyond personal content. They removed material, not just the material that was specific to Helen and Bill, but they removed other material as well that should have been kept in there. The voice's guidance and authority. I'm going to read what it says. The article asserts that all editing was always performed under the guidance of the voice. Jesus. Skeptics question the validity of this claim, suggesting that human judgment and the subjective interpretations of Helen and Ken played a significant, perhaps overriding role in deciding what to include or exclude. This challenges the idea that the final published version is the sole, quote-unquote, authorized or quote-unquote, correct one as intended by the divine source. That's a very major claim, counter argument, that that especially Ken and Helen let their egos get in, and their egos overrid what Jesus was telling them. And that's indeed possible. And you know, if they're what we've been saying is that if their egos got in regard to form, that's okay, right? Maybe not always okay, but for the most part. But if they change the content of the course, that's something different. That's a problem. You know, if they actually change the content of the course and made it something other than what it really was or really is, then that's a major change. And if they tried to hide that and lied about that, well, that's problematic, right? Transparency and copyright issues, the controversy surrounding the initial withholding of the Urtext and the Hewlett and Casey versions from the public, and the subsequent legal battles over copyright are used as arguments against the FIP ACIM stewardship. Critics argue that attempts to suppress earlier versions and control the narrative indicate a desire to present only one specific curated interpretation as legitimate, rather than allowing students access to the full scribing history. Right? What were they hiding? Were they trying to hide something? Right? Were they keeping this material from the public because they did not want the truth to come out? Just like Epstein files, right? The Epstein files right now, people are saying, why are you not releasing the files, right? What are you trying to hide? What does Donald Trump not want people to see? Why is he claiming it's a hoax now, right? That Democratic hoax when everyone on his team was saying we want the files released as soon as possible, and that was a major campaign point that they were pushing, is to release the Epstein files. So the fact that they kept it under wraps and they did not release the original source materials to the public suggests that maybe they were trying to hide something, right? I don't think so, but there's intentional malicious lying, right, and deception, and then there's lying that happens out of negligence, like they just forgot what actually happened, and they try to cover themselves by creating story, but it was because they had forgotten the extent of the editing that had happened, which I also don't think that's true. But, you know, again, I don't think we're going to get to the end of this debate and controversy. You know, much as we, you know, as one side or the other side might present great evidence, there's still going to be a question. It's never going to be 100% proven one way or the other. Wapnick's influence. While the article downplays Kenneth Wapnick's role, critics often argue he had a profound influence on the final version, particularly in shaping its psychological framework and introducing his own interpretations, potentially steering the course away from its initial, more raw or direct spiritual message. And that's another very big claim and very damning claim, if it were true, that Ken actually change the course from the beginning. He swooped in there, pushed Bill out of the way, and Bill apparently didn't really want to edit the course anyway, from what we hear at least. But Ken swooped in there, pushed Bill aside, said to Helen, "All right, old lady, I got this." Right, I'm taking over. This, I'll tell you what the course means. You don't know what the course means. I'm going to tell you what the course means, and we're going to make the course fit what I say. That's a big claim. Now, I don't know if anyone is saying Ken actually did anything to that extent, but it's something like that. The Ken, you know, took the reins of the editing process and really changed stuff, and really like what's the word? He got in there and he tinkered with it in ways that were not kosher, right? In ways that were theologically and metaphysically unsound. It's a very big claim, very big claim. You know, and again, you'd have to think that Ken somehow was this villain, right? Which is what people make him out to be. Some people, not everyone. You know, there's the lovers of Ken and there's the haters of Ken, and there's very few people that are in between. I would like to think that we can be in between a little bit and say, well, maybe, you know, maybe Ken did suggest some things to Helen that she agreed to, and whether they connected with Jesus about it or not, Ken says they did, that they asked Jesus about everything that they were doing, and they didn't just make unilateral edits. And if anyone made a unilateral edit, it was Helen, right? So why blame Ken? But Helen really was the one in charge. And people say, well, no, Helen was an old lady. She was falling asleep sometimes when they were editing the course, and that left Ken to just, you know, be like, she fell asleep. I'm gonna change some shit. I'm gonna change this right now. You know, these words. Thinking that Helen wouldn't know that it was change, right? That this is these are big claims, right? Anything that is claimed has to have evidence, real solid evidence to support it. And unfortunately, we do not have that solid evidence, right? We weren't there. And that's why this whole debate is moot, really, ultimately, right? And why you don't get caught up in these debates. Don't get caught up in the controversy. Those who seek controversy will find it. Those who seek clarification will also find it. What is the clarification? We're going to get to that in a moment, what the clarification is. The authenticity of the Urtext and the HLC versions. The existence and publication of the HLC and Urtext versions, often referred to as the original edition by other publishers, serve as counter evidence that the earliest available drafts represent a more authentic or less adulterated form of the course. Proponents of these versions argue they contain a rawness and clarity lost in the later, more polished editions. Another big claim, but really it was really the first 5 or 6 paragraphs, 5 or 6 chapters of the course that had most of those edits. And if the rest of the course was largely unchanged. Now, it's one thing if the edits were made in every single chapter, in every single lesson, that's one thing. That would be something that I also would say, well, all right, well, then. But the fact that it was only the first 5 or 6 chapters and the rest of the course was unchanged for the most part leads us to really ask, well, then you got to read the rest of the course and say, is the rest of the course, right? So what if the first 5 or 6 chapters maybe were edited not to everyone's liking, right? And maybe it was edited in a way that changed things quite a bit, right? But if the rest of the course is the message, then, you know, and the rest of the course has these things that seem like non-dualistic and the theology of oneness and forgiveness as metaphor and you know, against a literal interpretation of A Course in Miracles, which, like Circle of Atonement, Robert Perry, it argues for more of a literal approach to A Course in Miracles, whereas Ken, you know, maintain that the course is largely symbolic, metaphorical, figurative. You cannot take it literally most of the time, and if you take it literally, you're making a mistake, right? You're reading it, you're interpreting it not as it was intended. Anyway, so what does Google Gemini say? I asked, what do you think is the fairest appraisal of this matter based on all the relevant evidence? Here's what Google Gemini says. The fair appraisal of the ACIM editing matter acknowledges the validity of both perspectives and the complexity of managing a text believed to be divinely inspired. The core of the matter is that different individuals value different things in a spiritual text. Some prefer the raw original transmission, while others value a polished, accessible curriculum. Now, if AI was around only for that answer, I would say, God bless it, right? That was a great answer. That is the answer right there. Fairest appraisal. A balanced view suggests that the official version, FIP, and the earlier drafts, Urtext, HLC, are best viewed not as competing versions of the same book, but as distinct stages in a process of transmission and refinement, each with its own merits and purpose. Right? You win some, you lose some, right? With the original text, there was some things there that are very valuable. Taking those things out maybe made a more polished text, but then you lost some of that original stuff, but you got a more polished text and you got a more coherent text. There's pros and cons to everything, right? The official edition perspective holds that it is the authorized and final curriculum as guided by the voice itself through the scribe, Helen Schucman. The editing process aimed to create a universal, polished, and accessible document by removing highly personal or ephemeral content, making it suitable for a broad audience. This perspective emphasizes that the ultimate goal was a clear, consistent teaching, and the edits were intentional and necessary to achieve that. The FIP version is the one that has been distributed globally and helped millions of students find inner peace. The original edition perspective holds that these versions offer a more complete, authentic, and raw experience of the original scribing process. Proponents argue that the removed content, including specific psychological discussions and personal exchanges, provided important context, clarity, and a warmer tone that is missing from the more formal FIP edition. This view suggests the edits were extensive and altered the original message, even if unintentionally, by applying human judgment and interpretation. Okay. Again, personal preference. What do you prefer? What, what, what do you like? Coke or Pepsi? Burger King or McDonald's? I hate to bring fast food into this, but that's what it's basically we're talking about is what resonates more with you, and maybe one thing is going to resonate more at the beginning, and then the other thing is going to resonate more later as you get more into the course. Like maybe you start with the FIP version, but then later you really start to appreciate the Urtext and the HLC, right? Because it does provide some things that we're missing from the FIP version that are helpful to know and to be aware of, right? That's how I feel. I think both are great. I'm glad that both are out. I'm glad that all of the versions are out. In sum, a fair appraisal recognizes significant differences. The Urtext and FIP versions are objectively different in length, tone, and organization. Subjective value. The best version is subjective and depends entirely on the individual needs and preferences. Some are fulfilled by the FIP edition, while others find the Urtext more helpful. Good intentions on both sides. Both the original scribes/editors and the later publishers of the Urtext likely acted on what they believe was the best way to preserve and share the course's message, leading to an honest disagreement on methodology. The role of experience. Ultimately, many students agree that the experience of applying the course's principles, e.g., for example, forgiveness, listening to one's own inner guide, matters more than the specific wording of a particular edition. The matter is a complex case study in textual transmission and authorship with no single quote-unquote right answer that satisfies all parties. All right. Have we solved this once and for all? No, we have not. But I mean, it is solved if you take the and you seek clarification, not controversy. It is solved, right? The answer is they're all good, right? They all have their place. Don't if you have any grievance or any problem or issue, then you are making a version of that same mistake once again, right? You are creating separation in your mind. Let's see what Ken wrote a whole very nice article about this whole situation. I'm going to read just one paragraph, maybe two paragraphs of what he said in conclusion. Okay, he says, it goes without saying that I do not want people to feel guilty if they buy or read the other versions. Right? He made a case for why the original FIP version is the one that was sanctioned by Jesus, right? But he says it goes without saying that I do not want people to feel guilty if they buy or read the other versions. People should do whatever they want as long as it is not hurtful. And contrary to what some people might say, there is no Pope of the course. People were saying that Ken is making himself out to be the Pope of the Course in Miracles. And he is saying, he is laying down by divine fiat what A Course in Miracles says, and only his interpretation, which he says is not an interpretation, is the correct interpretation of A Course in Miracles. And he says there is no Pope with the Course. So whatever you do with the Course, what is most important is that it be done without anger, judgment, or feelings of unfair treatment. Those responses are always of the ego. Thus, whatever you do, try to have the motivation whatever you do, try to have the motivation be ego-free. In that way, whatever you do will be loving. It's a great response, and I think he really meant that, right? While some may be tempted to argue about the merits of the different versions, all that is really important is where the Course comes from, everyone's right mind, which each of us can choose at any point. If you find yourself getting caught up in controversy, thinking the arguments mean something, you will argue and see differences where in truth there are none. Differences undoubtedly exist in form, the body, but never in content, the mind. Thus, there can be no significant differences among those who represent different positions. seeing differences and making them into something serious is when the ego catches us, for we are remembering not to laugh at the quote-unquote tiny mad idea of separation, et cetera, et cetera. I think I included some in the description of what Ken says. It's a perfect statement, what he's saying here. You know, this is also a version of what Google Gemini was saying as well, is saying as well, which is seek only clarification, not controversy. Every version of the course is okay. Don't feel guilty about using one or the other version. Don't feel guilty also if you prefer one and you even say that one is better than another. Don't feel guilty about that, right? Just do what you do without judgment, right? Let other people do what they do without judgment, because that's really the message of the course. Is you know, whatever is happening is somehow needs to happen as it's happening, right? If someone's making a mistake, let them make their mistake, right? Without judgment. Maybe you'll help them to correct their mistake, but you don't need to judge them in the process, and you don't need to judge this as right or wrong. But you can just, you know, generally people will correct their own mistakes, right? They will tune into their own guidance. They will correct their mistakes. They don't necessarily need you to come in and help them to do that. And if you have a stake in or an investment in helping people correct their mistakes, then you are mistaken yourself, right? So anyway, I hope this is helpful. Again, this is a long video. Some of my video, once I get my new phone, I'm gonna do some short videos. I hope these are not too long. Let me know. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your comments, your thoughts, and anything you want to share. And I'll see you very soon. And thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.